A couple of the models we've heard about this morning in previous presentations involved, for example, funding your company by going after lots of government grants, seeing what the NIH and the DoD can do to help you. Also selling services, whether it's contract research or other things that might be ultimately a distraction from your main line of business, but gets you through to that stage where you're ready for the next big round of funding. And then we had a fascinating presentation from Diagnostics for All, a new company born out of technology from George Whiteside's lab, based on basically a litmus paper type device for cheap diagnostics on paper that would help people who have need to be more closely monitored in the developing world. Their blood levels of different proteins and so forth. Anyway. The idea there was to not take venture capital at all, to make it nonprofit. And I wanted to get each of you to kind of talk about this question of whether there are some ideas that are just so big that you can't take money for them. You have to go the nonprofit route to make sure they don't get co-opted in some way and turned into big pharma products for the developed world.
Well, there's a lot of questions in the one you asked. So there are clearly ideas that probably shouldn't take venture capital because, well, let me make it really, I'll state the obvious from probably everyone in the audience, which is I have investors, university endowments, pension funds that expect a simple result, which is a return on their investment. And they expect it sort of in the 10-year time frame. So if an idea can't even approach satisfying that, then I'm really the wrong participant in the investment. There are other ideas where they can grab a lot of non-dilutive sources of capital to do it, and I applaud people that do that. I recognize that venture capital as a pure financial vehicle is the most expensive source of capital. You give away equity in the company. It's not a loan with an interest rate. So if someone can find a mechanism for not taking venture capital from a pure financial transaction, I think they should explore it. I want to believe, but maybe this is looking in the mirror, I want to believe that venture capitalists are more than just checkbooks, and that we have a set of experiences and a network and knowledge about how to build companies and how to be appropriate both not only in the good moments but in the bad moments. And I think some people recognize that. So there are certainly examples, and I think Bob's a great example of that, where Bob could probably go out and raise capital at a variety of different sources. And maybe it'll be less expensive than the classic venture capital model, but he has chosen that venture capitalists is a good partnership. And again, what I've in turn said to myself which is let's set up the models that are not massively dilutive to the founders up front, because I just don't believe that. I think founders, you want them to be engaged, and if you scare them away with the first transaction because you bought 90% of the company, you may have won that day, but you've lost the battle. So, going back to the point, which is if people can find non-dilutive sources of capital, I love it. I certainly love it if I'm in the company when they find that. But if they can find a way to do it without venture capital, then they should explore it. But again, just be aware that you're hopefully buying more with venture capital than just a check.
I'll just add to that a little bit and just to pick two different examples. I agree with everything you just said. So, at Bind, which is a nanotechnology delivery company, Omid Farragut is out, who's one of my fellows and founder of that company. I mean, he's done a great job of raising non-dilutive capital through foundations and, and the government. And yet we still have quite a bit of venture capital as well. Though I think the interesting thing, and this was like Terry's point about there were several questions embedded in what you asked about, trying to do things for the third world, and I think the AIR model, just to extend it a little bit further, is actually very interesting. So, when David Edwards and I first proposed this idea of, these new kinds of aerosols, it was people really shot it down. I mean, the NIH, when we wrote, this is what you do in academia. The way you first raise money is you write a grant, and then you have all the academic experts tell you that you can't do it, it'll never work, which they did. They gave us a terrible score. But later on, we kept pushing, so we did get the science paper, we did start AIR, we got this proof of principle, sold it, as Terry pointed out, for a lot of money. But in the course of that, we also developed a lot of the principles which showed the skeptics were wrong. And we developed manufacturing procedures, we did clinical trials, and so forth. What David then did after the company was sold is started a nonprofit called MEND. And one of the ideas there was to help the third world. And in particular, just to pick that example, he was thinking about vaccines, tuberculosis vaccines. There's actually some very good vaccines that can help lots of people. Problem is right now they're injected, which is very hard to do in the third world, and they're also in solution, which is terrible in terms of, keeping these formulations stable. On the other hand, if you made dry powder aerosols, which is what we were doing, that might mean you could just give somebody something to breathe and you won't have these storage problems. So he did that. The Gates Foundation gave him $10 million. They're talking about giving them a lot more. So to me, if we didn't do the academic work, if we didn't start the company, never be to the point where we could do the kinds of things that you were talking about and, that George is trying to do and others.